Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Eddie Liger Power Hour, starting early once again. I got my fan blowing right now, so if that's too loud, let me know. If it's making too much noise, I'll turn it off and I'll just suffer through the heat. I'll do this whole podcast sweating. I ain't afraid. So today we're going to talk about the DeSantis campaign, which is, along with the other establishment Republicans, are just being murked right now by Trump. But there's a lot of Republicans in the race. So you got to wonder if they're going for a similar strategy to what they did in 2020 to Bernie Sanders, or you had all these establishment candidates running to try and split the vote, and then at the last second before Super Tuesday, all the establishment candidates dropped out and endorsed Biden. So I do wonder if the Republican establishment is trying a similar strategy here to oust Trump and make sure that Trump isn't the nominee. We'll also be talking about Joe Biden sitting down with Fareed Zakaria of CNN, which he did recently, and gave basically the state of the war in Ukraine or adding Ukraine to NATO, talked about U.S. relations with China. There were some interesting things in that interview. I watched it all, so you don't have to. So we'll be breaking that down. Lindsey Graham, Republican, and Richard Blumenthal, Democrat, two elected politicians, recently held a conference to talk about the likelihood of Putin using nuclear weapons in Ukraine and what the U.S. response would be. So we'll discuss that a little bit. And we'll also talk about the nation of Laos, the Marxist-Leninist socialist nation of Laos, which is the most bombed country on earth, and a nation that's worth studying for all communists and anti-imperialists in the West. Also, I want to add before we get started. Oh, thank you so much, Ross. Already getting super chats. €2 for the colorful thumbnail. Thank you. I'm glad you like it. Appreciate you. I also want to point out before we get started that my phone is dying. It's constantly overheating. It's constantly restarting on its own. No matter how many videos and how many apps I delete, my phone is always out of storage. The other day, TikTok deleted itself off of my phone. So I'm not sure if I'm being hacked by the NSA or what. But either way, I've now started a special fund that Ross has donated to a bunch because he's the man. But I've started a special fund exclusively to get me an iPad so that I can continue to make TikToks and continue to make short form content. So we've already got over $60 in this fund. Trying to raise like $350 or whatever, so I can get an iPad, continue making the short form TikTok content, which is our most viral content and the content that best helps to grow the Institute. So if you like what we do, if you want to support what we do, donate on Buy Me a Coffee /Eddie Liger to the Eddie Liger, buy Eddie Liger an iPad before his phone implodes fund, because my phone doesn't have much longer, maybe a week. So if you want me to keep making TikToks and if you want Midwestern Marks to continue growing, consider throwing a few bucks or whatever you can into that fund. But either way, or you can, I tweeted it out. I tweeted this link out also. If you don't have money to donate, you can go retweet that link and get it out there and share it. All right. But that's all I got for now. We'll jump right into our content after we listen to the International.
about a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
radical redistribution of political and economic power. First of all, Sherpa wants to see the mullet. Here it is in all its glory. Do you like it? Does it look good? I've been trying to fluff the back and condition and shampoo it every day. Yeah, pretty happy with how it turned out. Shout out to my barber. Shout out to Anna from King Cuts, who left Sports Clips and Great Clips and Super Cuts because they were underpaying her for her fantastic work. So I like to support her and her small business, and she does a fantastic job of cutting my hair. I was pretty disgusted with Great Clips and Super Cuts, the lack of quality I was getting from those haircuts. And their employees, you could tell they're just exploited, underpaid, have no passion for what they're doing. So I love supporting the small business rather than those big haircutting corporations. Wait, are you just going to deal with not having a phone like YOLO? I'm an iPad guy now. Email me or something. Yeah. The plan right now is to use the iPad exclusively for work, use the iPad exclusively for creating content, for creating TikToks, for editing TikToks, captioning them, all that good stuff. And then just use my phone as a phone, use my phone for texting and calling and things like that. Because right now I'm trying to do both. My phone is doing double duty. And I think that's causing it to overheat and break down because I try to post so many TikToks in a day. So for those who are just joining us now, donate to the Buy Eddie Liger an iPad before his phone implodes fund at buymeacoffee.com/Eddie Liger. That's where you can help us continue to create TikToks, even when my phone blows up, which could happen at any moment now, honestly. Hey, Jacob's back. I haven't seen you in a while, Jacob. Good to see you here. I recently ordered some new books, and they should be coming in today. I'll make a TikTok later showcasing specifically what I got. Awesome. I'm pumped for that. Can't wait to see what books you got. Jacob's got a dang library. He's got a whole dungeon of classic Marxist texts at his house now. So great job. Proud of you. When are you going to talk about France and the Netherlands? Probably when I have Carlos and Noah on, or we've talked about France, but we're planning an interview with a French communist who can go more in depth about what's going on, because it's hard sometimes to get a grasp on what exactly is going on in the class dynamics and the historical context of everything. If you're in another country and if you haven't been studying, the day-to-day developments in France, which I have not. So, yeah, we'll be getting a French communist on, but definitely soon. So stay tuned. Stay tuned indeed. So what should we start with? Let's start with the DeSantis campaign fumbling here, because they're doing incredibly bad. Trump is he's got a near historic lead. If not, it might be a historic lead on the other Republican candidates. And the more that DeSantis talks, the more he spends on marketing and communicates with the American people, the less people seem to like him, which is something that a lot of folks predicted, as we're going to talk about. But here's just a random Fox News segment on DeSantis and how he's floundering. But you'll see that also the other establishment candidates are floundering as well. That just makes me think, though, that perhaps the Republicans are going to try the same strategy that the Democrats used against Bernie Sanders in 2020, where they're going to run all of these irrelevant candidates like, Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, whoever else, who get 2-3% of the vote. And then before the pivotal election day on for the primaries, which for the Democrats is called Super Tuesday. I don't know how the Republican primary is structured, but you have all these, at least in the Democratic primary, all the establishment candidates dropped out and endorsed Biden over Bernie Sanders. So they garnered small bits or small followings, and then at the last second dropped out and told their followings to support Biden. I think the Republicans might be planning something similar here, where they have all these candidates run and then drop out and endorse DeSantis over Trump at the last minute. But, that remains to be seen. Trump still has well over 50% of the vote right now, according to polling. So it remains to be seen whether such a strategy will even be successful. Thank you so much, Christopher Romero, for the people's propaganda. That's what it will be used for. You bet. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Here with the latest on the state of the primary is Politico congressional reporter Olivia Beavers. Olivia, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If we go back to the night of the midterm elections, Governor DeSantis was one of the very few bright spots. He seemed poised to make a real run at the nomination. What do you think has happened so far? I mean, I'm not writing any obituaries, but so far, what do you think has happened?
So at least from the Republicans I talked to, Trey, they thought that he was riding a high for a while. That's why you saw, pundits, reporters, they're all talking about this high optimism that he would be able to, rise up in the 2024 primary and at least give Donald Trump a run for his money. But we've seen
that was just the establishment trying to hype him up. They did the same thing in 2016 with like Scott Walker. And then the people listened to Scott Walker talk and they're like, no, thank you. That guy sucks.
Him sort of stalling. He's blaming the media for that, even though some of his own people are saying effectively that they're far behind. So he's finding
it's hilarious that he's blaming the media for being behind Trump when right now, at least the Democratic establishment media is so anti-Trump. They would much rather have DeSantis than Trump. And like I said, the only reason DeSantis had so much hype behind him, or one of the only reasons, he's also done a good job of marketing himself as this culture warrior. For the right, this anti-establishment figure, even though he is the establishment. The only reason, like I said, that he had so much popularity at first was because a lot of the establishment media has gotten behind him.
That this is really a tough position to be. He's been able to cut off reporters back home. He's been able to sort of rule with an iron fist, and that's not how you get to operate in a presidential election.
And that's really interesting commentary there, that at home, when DeSantis was marketing himself in Florida, he was able to cut off reporters and kind of manipulate things so that he's always portrayed in a good light. But now that he's campaigning nationally, now that he's trying to sell himself to America, he's less able to manipulate things. People are becoming more familiar with the kind of guy he actually is, which is not, helping his poll numbers. Like I said, the more people get to know Meatball Ron DeSantis, the less they're going to want to vote for this meatball.
All right, Olivia, you brought it up, so I'm going to play a clip, and then I'm going to ask you about it on the other side, okay?
Okay.
The media does not want me to be the nominee. I think that's very, very clear. Why? Because they know I'll beat Biden, but even more importantly, they know I will actually deliver. And oh, by the way, we just announced last week better fundraising than any non-incumbent has ever had. I'm looking forward to being able to participate in the debate, but you got to earn it, and you got to work, and it requires
better. He's complaining about the establishment media being against him, but then he's talking about how much money he's fundraising, even though he's not an incumbent. Whenever you hear these guys, these corporate politicians brag about fundraising, Nancy Pelosi does this all the time, that's them bragging about being corrupt. That's them saying, I got more money from corporate donors than any of the other candidates, unless it's small dollar donations, which, Bernie Sanders kind of changed the game with in 2016. Now all these candidates try and get small dollar donors. But that's not what DeSantis is talking about there. The majority of their fundraising comes from corporations, from banks, from think tanks or lobbying groups, whatever, corporate America. And these guys brag about that. Like Pelosi will always say, of course I should be the leader of the Democrats. I'm the greatest fundraiser in the party. Like, that just means you're the most corrupt. That means that you get the most corporate money. Kind of a weird flex, but okay.
There's a lot of toil and tears and sweat, and we're going to do that.
Olivia, you and I have known each other a long time. I'm always open to blaming the media for almost anything. But I mean, any candidate.
Are you not a member of the media? Are you not a member of Rupert Murdoch's Fox News?
Any candidate can blame the media. I mean, Tim Scott could do it. President Trump could do it. Joe Biden could do it. So what do you make of that explanation?
It seems like he was just trying to find a way to get out of answering that question and point the finger. I mean, if his own people are saying it, it's a much more difficult position. Steve Cortez was saying that they were behind, but this has been a thing that we've seen actually in presidential elections, I think ranging back to Newt Gingrich, where that sort of became a very powerful talking point, and him bringing it up is nothing new. It's just interesting that that's where he's pointing the finger.
Olivia, I think part of it is,
and he's copying Trump. He's definitely copying Trump, because that's exactly what Trump would do anytime the media criticize him. Fake news, the media is the enemy of the people, fake news, they're lying to you. People don't trust the media in this country, so if you can, if they're going to trash you anyways, and you can portray yourself as being opposed to the corporate fake news media, that's helpful, especially with Republican voters. The problem with DeSantis is he's actually part of the establishment. Yeah, as Jacob points out, he oversaw torture at Guantanamo Bay. He's raised so much money, as he admitted there, or as he bragged about there. He's fundraised so much money from corporate America. He's been backed by the establishment ever since he got into politics. So it's gonna take more than criticizing the media to get people to see him as an anti-establishment candidate.
Is bad luck. His chief opponent, the front runner, has been in.
Dude, right, Jacob? What the F is up with this dude's lack of a good haircut? Like, what? That's what I thought, too. This guy looks like a pencil.
Indicted twice. And most GOP candidates have felt the need to defend the former president in the face of those indictments, more so the state than the federal, but both. So it's hard to both attack and defend at the same time. I think that's the challenge that Governor DeSantis and others are having, is where is the opening?
I've heard so many Republicans talking about the strategies that they should have. Oh, attack him on his personality, attack him here. It seems like they haven't really found a sweet spot. The indictments, I was looking at polling, and I think they're from a week or two back, but 15% said this is only going to make them less likely to vote for Donald Trump. About 43 or 2 said that it would make them more likely, and then 42 or 43 said it wouldn't change how they were going to support him. And so if that's the case, if these are not making any
watching Trump is making me laugh. Watching him just walk around stage and clap for himself.
movements, I think that kind of also explains why you saw people like Nikki Haley saying one day she's going after the Justice Department, saying that this isn't right how they're pursuing justice, and then two or 3 days later she's calling it reckless.
All right, Olivia, I'm going to ask you about another area of your expertise. There are things that have vexed the brightest minds for centuries. What's the origin of evil? Is infinity a number or a concept? And how exactly does one go about getting excommunicated from the Freedom Caucus? So they kicked a member out this past week, I guess.
Now they're going to go into Marjorie Taylor Greene being booted from the Freedom Caucus. But yeah, that's the state of the election. Did they show the polling numbers at any point there? I thought they did. Yeah, here we go. Let's pull this up. So look at this. Look at this lead for Trump, 56%. And I haven't looked at the methodology of this polling to, judge how accurate it is, but 22 for DeSantis, then 5 for Ramaswamy. Pence has 4% of the vote, all the 70-year-old evangelical Christians who don't like Trump because of his tweets. Scott, Nikki Haley. So what I think these guys might try and do is just stay in the race till the last second and then drop out and endorse DeSantis. But even if they all did that now, Trump still has 56% of the vote. So he's still going to win. So it's looking like Trump will win the Republican primary, which is very, very interesting. I wonder how because they're trying to find all these ways to beat Trump, but I have a feeling his position on, say, the war in Ukraine, where he's saying we need to look for peace. He's calling out all the U.S. involvement in Ukraine, the efforts of the Biden administration to keep the fighting going, keeping the war going. I think a lot of people agree with that, and a lot of people like Trump's at least anti-imperialist rhetoric on that position. Right, so there's no way that DeSantis can overcome that, because DeSantis is a member of the political establishment. He is a member of the American political ruling class that has this proxy war project in Ukraine going on, or is in favor of this proxy war project in Ukraine. So he can't come out against that. He has to be in favor of furthering the proxy war. So how is he supposed to attack Trump when on the policy, on the issue of the Ukraine war, the most pivotal issue in the world right now? He's way to the right of Trump. You know, he's an imperialist versus Trump, at least is claiming to take an anti-imperialist position, even though when, you know, his administration was in office, the proxy war efforts with Ukraine were still being furthered. And, you know, even if Trump were to get elected and try to end the war in Ukraine, the State Department and the Department of Defense are still stocked full with Victoria Nuland types, with neocons and neoliberals who are emotionally invested and just obsessed with furthering the war in Ukraine. So, you know, would Trump actually be able to pull America out? Would the Department of Defense and State Department and U.S. intelligence agencies let him get away with it? Who's to say? But when it comes to the campaign, you know, that's a huge advantage that he has over DeSantis. The fact that he's taking the anti-imperialist position there, and DeSantis is not, because as time passes, more and more people realize what's going on in Ukraine, and more people are going to rise up and demand peace. Yeah, it's interesting that there are figures on the Republican Party who are talking about this as well, or within the Republican Party, versus the Democrats are pretty much all in favor of proxy war. But this is interesting. Some of you know comedian Shane Gillis. He's on Joe Rogan all the time. He's one of the fastest growing comedians in the world. He got fired from SNL for making some like off-color jokes. But he basically weighed in. I don't know how long ago this was, like a year ago. He weighed in on DeSantis and he said, the more that people get to know Ron DeSantis, the less they're going to like him. That's exactly what's happened. This comedian predicted exactly what was going to happen.
Be the president. But Gavin Newsom's like DeSantis, where I'm like, once people hear him talk, you're going to go, oh. Like Gavin Newsom's just doing Obama.
But
doing Obama.
The difference is people don't like Gavin Newsom in his own state. They just take him over a Republican.
Yeah.
And people love DeSantis.
People love DeSantis in Florida.
They get, but there are.
Look at Joe trying to argue for DeSantis here. He was big on the DeSantis thing for a while. He's like, DeSantis is anti-woke. That means he's anti-establishment, right? Grr. Me hunt elk. I'm sorry, but Joe is such an ape. He has the brain of an ape sometimes. People like DeSantis. He called Disney woke. Yeah, that's not what Shane Gillis is saying. He's saying that the more people get to know DeSantis, the less they're going to like him. And he's 100% right, Joseph.
They get, but there are people that love him. Like he has fans.
I know,
that love him. I don't think Gavin Newsom has a lot of fans.
Here's what I think about
You know what I'm
DeSantis.
saying?
I think, yeah, I hear you for sure.
Maybe he got busted wearing no mask in a restaurant when everyone's supposed to be masked. And
I think with DeSantis, I don't know enough about him. I think people love the idea of DeSantis, where they're like, Florida fucking said, fuck COVID. We're going to keep, you know. Right. They did their thing. So
the idea of DeSantis, the idea that he's anti-woke and anti-COVID restrictions, that's what they like. They don't like DeSantis himself.
They love the idea of DeSantis, but nobody's ever heard him talk. Nobody's ever seen him talk. And when you do, you go, oh, fuck, this guy's a dork. They go, God damn it, this is another dork.
I've seen him talk a bunch of times.
I know, I'm just talking about the general public. I think when they see him talk, right now I'm sure he's doing fine in approval, but nobody's seen him. And when he talks, especially if he starts trying to talk shit back and forth with Trump.
Yeah, that's going to get ugly.
It's going to split that.
And what have we seen so far? I've never seen a comedian make such a correct and astute political analysis there. Like, we haven't seen too much head-to-head with Trump and DeSantis yet. But when DeSantis announced on Twitter Spaces, it was kind of a disaster. The Twitter space kept crashing because they had too many people in there. And then Trump released this Instagram video making fun of the announcement and mocking DeSantis that went mega viral, right? Everybody thought it was hilarious and, you know, classic Trump moment. Oh, he owned DeSantis. Exactly. DeSantis is in way over his head when it comes to actual, you know, confrontation with Trump or debating with Trump or trying to insult Trump. Plus, you have Trump moving to the left of DeSantis on the Ukraine war. You have him arguing the anti-imperialist position on the campaign trail, while DeSantis is stuck arguing for the imperialist position because he's nothing but an establishment shill. And the more this plays out, I think the more people are gonna abandon the DeSantis campaign. Just as Gillis is saying, the more people some people like the idea of DeSantis because they see him as anti-woke, anti-mask mandates, anti-vaccine mandates. But not a lot of people have actually heard him talk. Not a lot of people actually know what the guy's about. And, the guy was someone who literally, oversaw torture at Guantanamo Bay himself. An absolute pawn of the American ruling class, the ruling economic class, who is only pretending to be an anti-establishment figure by criticizing what we call wokeism.
It's gonna be fun, dude. Meatball Ron. Meatball Ron.
Oh my God. So exciting.
Yeah, it'll be fun. The spectacle will be fun.
The spectacle will be fun, but then it's also the same prospect every time. I never feel good about who's going to be the president. It's always like, okay.
Yeah,
it's never like anybody that really is coming along that's going to like revamp the system in some sort of meaningful way. And the only way to do that is to take money out. And they're never going to do that. So it's just fucking keep telling jokes.
Let's advocate for a revolutionary movement, Joe. Or keep telling jokes. That seems to be working well for you. Making millions and millions of dollars. Got that big Spotify contract. But for the rest of us who work for a living, let's get a revolutionary movement that revamps, revolutionizes our political system and actually makes it a democracy. So very interesting there. The more that the public gets to know Ron DeSantis, the less they like him. Which actually was kind of similar to what the Biden strategy ended up being in 2020 was let's get Biden to talk as little as possible, right? People like the idea of Joe Biden. They know him as Obama's vice president. He has that establishment sort of name and pull, or he has that name value. But when he talks, he keeps gaffing. When he talks, he keeps saying stupid stuff that makes his polling go down. So they basically just hit him, showed as little of future President Joe Biden as possible. And then, like I said, had all the establishment candidates drop out of the race at the last minute and endorse him. So I wonder if DeSantis and his campaign will go forward with a similar strategy and if it will be as successful. Somehow I doubt it. We could get Joe behind a revolution. Joe Biden? I don't know about that. Biden won't even take part in primary debates. Exactly. Yeah. They're using the same strategy now. They know the more media coverage that RFK gets and the more coverage Biden gets, the more people are going to like RFK. The more they can directly compare these two and hear these two talk, the less they're going to like Biden. So, less than 50% likes. Let's fix that, comrades. You bet. Thank you very much. Be sure to like, share, comment on the stream. Help boost us in the Al Gore rhythm. We know that the Al Gore rhythm is heavily suppresses anti-imperialist socialist content like ours. So Joe Rogan, LOL. Oh, I got you. We could get Joe Rogan behind a revolution. Yeah, I think we could. I consider myself the communist Joe Rogan ever since somebody called me that like a month ago. So if anyone can do it, it's us, our show. Join the revolution, Joe. Get money out of politics. Need a revolution from the bottom up. All right, it looks like our YouTube chat is more stable now. I don't know what was going on earlier. People said the YouTube chat was being glitchy. We're probably being hacked by the dang NSA, just like my cell phone is. I've said this a million times now, but when I try to make TikToks lately, my phone is always out of storage, no matter how much I delete from it. It's always restarting and like overheating on me. And the other day, TikTok self-deleted itself from my phone. It just took itself off my phone. So as my phone is imploding / being hacked by the NSA, we've started a fundraising drive to get me an iPad that I can use exclusively for creating content, for creating TikToks. So to donate to the Buy Eddie an iPad fund, so that our short form content can continue, our most popular content that grows the Institute. You can donate here at buymeacoffee/Eddie Liger. Right now we've got well over $60. That fund is exclusively for buying an iPad so that I can continue to make TikToks, continue to grow Midwestern Mark. So appreciate everybody who's already donated to that, and appreciate anyone who plans to. If you donate, I will give you a personalized message from me saying thank you. If you want to, you can send messages along with your donations if you donate at Buy Me a Coffee. So if you have like a question, send it along with your donation and I'll answer your question, give you a personalized response. But yeah, we're trying to raise as much money as we can to get as nice of an iPad as we can so I can continue to make TikToks, continue to grow the Institute, continue to educate the youth who are being brainwashed by this NATO-run TikTok app that boosts neoliberal content like the content of Philip DeFranco. That's why I will never use an iPhone. Yeah, maybe I should switch to an Android next time. But yeah, it's very, very weird the way that my iPhone is glitching and not allowing me to use it. So an iPad is necessary, a work iPad that I use exclusively for video creation. So buymeacoffee.com/Eddie Liger to donate to the iPad fund. Yeah. What's your opinion on Rosa Luxemburg? Do you think she had the right ideas of socialism and the wrong application compared to Lenin? I don't even really understand the debate between Lenin and Rosa Luxemburg. I think Rosa Luxemburg was talking about the necessity of spontaneity or the importance of spontaneity, and Lenin was basically like, we acknowledge that spontaneity is important, right? But organization and being prepared for a spontaneous revolutionary movement, or I mean moment, is what we stress, what the Bolsheviks stress. And like obviously historically Lenin led a successful revolution, whereas Rosa Luxemburg and the other socialist leaders in Germany were killed. And the party ended up supporting World War I, which was a huge betrayal of the global working class movement, which the German Communist Party was leading at the time. And then Hitler rose to power in Germany. So, you know, in that debate, I do think Lenin was correct and I side with Lenin, but it was a very minor debate that I don't even know if it was worth having. And I think Rosa Luxemburg is a fantastic thinker. She was an excellent theorist. The book, The Accumulation of Capital by Rosa Luxemburg, is very good. It's her analyzing some of the economic theory that Marx lays out in Capitals Volume 1, 2, and 3. So huge Rosa Luxemburg fan, definitely a hero of the socialist movement and in the history of the class struggle. So I use Google Drive and iCloud, and those companies will delete my most offensive pro-Stalin videos. Why just those videos? That is really weird. I swear, like every time I'm about to make a really good TikTok that's going to go viral, that's like when my phone restarts. And then like we'll delete the video so I can't use what I've already filmed. It's so frustrating. Similar to the way that whenever, like I had a viral video about Assange, Julian Assange on TikTok the other day, right? And as it starts to go viral, TikTok takes the video down. They pull it down for hateful misinformation, blah, blah, blah. So I appeal it and I say, this isn't misinformation, and they put it back up. But then today or last night while I was sleeping, they took the sound off the video. So then I have to appeal that. It's like, what the hell? And why is it only the videos that go viral? I mean, it's partially because people are mass reporting them, right? Liberals and imperialists will report my videos once they see them go viral. But who's against or who's reporting videos standing up for Assange, right? Who's that dedicated to taking down all these videos about Assange? So I don't know. With TikTok being run by a bunch of NATO operatives and State Department officials, I'm just really skeptical of anything that goes down on the app. Yeah. Huawei Android phones will definitely let you do anything if you support the revolution. Eddie is particularly skilled in that format. Thank you very much. Yeah, For whatever reason, people enjoy the TikToks more than anything else. The TikToks have grown our institute more than anything. We've had so many TikTok accounts grow to just tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers in the cases of a lot of them. They just get wiped out. They get wiped off the map. But they've really helped us build our YouTube audience and our other platforms. So if I have an iPad that can store a lot of videos and that I can use for editing and even like creating memes using this app called CapCut, I really think our TikTok will blow up even more. And I think the Institute will blow up even more. But yeah, I need to stop using my personal iPhone and get a work iPad. So again, buymeacoffee.com/Eddie Liger. Yeah, I see people arguing about what I should use in the comments. I know Apple isn't great. I know how to use iOS. I know how to use Apple devices because that's what I've been using my entire life. So I'm going to use an iPad. That's what I'm going to buy. I appreciate the suggestions, but I know exactly what I could do with an iPad. I know what my skills are as far as making TikToks. I know what I need, the technology to do for me, and an iPad does everything I need. So appreciate your recommendations, but we're going with an iPad. I will not be talked out of that one. Unless there's like some Huawei version of iPads that are available for cheap in the US. I've also used iPads for work in the past and wrestling especially. So got a lot of experience with them. What's your opinion on the recent TYT controversy? I haven't seen it. What controversy are they in now? Eddie, whenever you feel like jumping out the window, watch Oversimplified's Russian Revolution. A lot of utopian claims. Oh, yeah, I have that one in our list of videos to watch. We'll definitely do it at some point, but yeah, maybe not today because I'm worried I'll jump out the window today. I respect that, Eddie, for sure, and I respect people's advice too. I appreciate people for trying to give me advice, but that is my reasoning for going with an iPad. I would say stick with what you're used to. The learning curve might take too long, and there's no time to waste. LOL. Exactly. There's no time to waste. So buymeacoffee.com/Eddie Liger, and let's get started educating everyone through TikTok. Yo, comrades, sorry I'm late. As usual, what did I miss? Not too much yet. We just talked about the Republican primary and DeSantis versus Trump. But has Eddie talked about Laos yet? Love you guys so much. Thank you very much. No, I have not talked about Laos. We're going to jump into that next. I'm becoming an ANCAP if Eddie buys an iPad and betrays the revolution. I'm just going to buy the iPad and use it like to play Candy Crush. I just really want you guys to support my Candy Crush addiction. It's not that my phone is deteriorating and breaking down more and more every day. It's got so many cracks in it too. Either way, let's talk about the socialist nation of Laos. Because there are a lot of people who don't even know that Laos is a socialist or Marxist-Leninist country. But it's one of the five: Vietnam, China, the DPRK, Cuba, and Laos. I was forgetting Laos itself, but Laos is one of the five, and it's actually the most bombed country on the planet. More bombs were dropped on Laos in the 60s and 70s than were even dropped on Vietnam. And the entire time this was happening, Nixon, JFK, and the U.S. leadership was lying about it. That's why it's called the secret war against Laos, because they said there is no direct military intervention going on in Laos. There's no direct military action. We're doing some things covertly, but we're not attacking Laos directly. Meanwhile, they were dropping more bombs on Laos than any other country in human history. Right? So that shows you how brazen the imperialist lies can get, right? The country that they bombed more than any other country, they were coming on the media every day and lying, saying, no, there's no direct military confrontation with Laos. So actually, about a third of the bombs in Laos didn't detonate when they were dropped. So they're still laying around the countryside today. And since the bombing stopped, What do you think the most bombed people have been killed by the bombs? Because they come across these bombs that are undetonated, and children or farmers or whoever try and clean them up, and they often explode and kill people or maim people. So there's still, to this day, tons of undetonated bombs all over Laos that were dropped on them by the U.S. in a war, of course, where they never attacked us, where we invaded just to stop the spread of communism, dropped thousands and thousands of tons of Agent Orange and napalm on the people of Vietnam, destroyed their infrastructure, destroyed their agricultural base, and did the same to Laos while lying about it every step of the way. So here's a TikTok I made about it as I've been reading about the country. Enjoy. Country in the world is it Vietnam, Cambodia, Korea, maybe one of the European countries that got hit hard in World War II? No, it's actually the socialist nation of Laos, who the US dropped 270 million cluster bombs on in the 60s and 70s. And they lied about it the entire time, telling the American public that they were not directly involved in Laos at all. Nixon and JFK both gave speeches overtly lying about it. Many of the bombs actually didn't detonate, and they're still in Laos today, which is a huge safety hazard. Over 1,000 people have been killed by the bombs since the bombing stopped. But despite this, Laos remains independent and socialist to this day, and they have a great relationship with their neighbors in Vietnam. Solidarity with the Lao comrades. I'm guessing no one went to jail for it either. No, of course not. Nobody was ever held accountable. Not even the people who lied directly to the American public and said we're not doing anything in Laos. And I mean, this is relevant too because the U.S. just sent cluster bombs to Ukraine. So especially since this time, a lot of even NATO member countries and countries around the world have said cluster bombs are a war crime. You can't target very precisely with them. They always end up killing civilians. You have situations like in Laos where not a lot of them detonate. But because NATO's running out of weapons to send to Ukraine and the Ukrainians are running out of weaponry and ammunition, we're sending them cluster bombs. We're sending them bombs which could be considered a war crime that the U.S. has a history of using to extreme degrees while lying to the American public about the use of cluster bombs. So nothing new, what's going on in Ukraine right now. And this is a really excellent video called The Secret War Laos by a YouTube channel called Hindsight that I found. So we'll watch this and discuss things a little bit more in depth. I saw your super chat, Battle Cossack. Thoughts on Turkmenistan? Thank you so much for the 50 Argentinian dollar super chat. It's one of those countries that's demonized by mainstream media like the DPRK. There's a video made by Visual Politic. I do not know much about Turkmenistan. I cannot really weigh in on that at all, unfortunately. Maybe I'll check out the video by Visual Politic to see what it's all about. But if they're demonized by the mainstream media, you know that they're doing something that counters what the Western imperialists want. But thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate you funding our project.
It's a landlocked country at the heart of Southeast Asia, and it has a dubious record to its name. Laos is the most bombed country in the world. In the 1960s...
Next, the U.S. is going to send nukes because the cluster bombs are out of stock. Yeah. I mean, that's the same justification Biden gave to Fareed Zakaria. Like, we're out of weapons. What else do we do other than send them cluster bombs? Oh, we ran out of cluster bombs. We better send them nukes.
In the 70s, the U.S. Air Force flew more than 500,000.
Instead of sending them to Zelensky, send them right to the Azov battalion. Send them right to the far-right militias. Cut out the middleman.
Missions over Laos and dropped hundreds of millions of bombs. But all
Eastern Turkmenistan. Oh, that's what. Okay. I know what Turkmenistan. Eastern Turkmenistan is the CIA name of Xinjiang. Yeah, the East Turkestan Islamic movement. I was like, why the heck can't I think of anything about Turkmenistan? I can't even think of where that is. Yeah, that's what the CIA calls Xinjiang, China, to support separatism and separatist movements like the East Turkestan Islamic movement, the ETIM in China, which really was a splinter of the Mujahideen and has a lot of the weapons that the U.S. sent to Osama bin Laden's Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s. A lot of those weapons are still around, and they've been filtered to the ETIM. And the U.S. took the East Turkestan Islamic movement was listed as a terrorist group by like every country in the world, including the U.S. And then when the U.S. wanted to support separatism in China, they took them off of the terrorist listing. They said this is no longer a terrorist group. So the U.S. could start giving them funding and weapons, and they could increase their recruiting in Xinjiang. So there have been a lot of horrible massacres, a lot of horrible attacks by violent far-right members of the East Turkestan Islamic movement, which China has cracked down on. And that's why they've launched their quote-unquote re-education campaigns in Xinjiang to combat extremism, to root out extremism. It's because the U.S. has been backing these separatist groups who want to establish East Turkmenistan, which is really just, you know, a word for China. It's a separatist movement in China. So, all right, that has nothing to do with Laos, but yeah.
All of this had to be done in secret.
I want to make it clear to the American people and to all the world that all we want in Laos is peace, not war.
There are no American combat forces in Laos. We do have perhaps some other activities. I won't discuss those other activities at this time.
Laos was first occupied by
So you see that? Listen to this again.
and dropped hundreds of millions of bombs. But all of this had to be done in secret.
I want to make it clear to the American people and to all the world that all we want in Laos is peace, not war.
There are no American combat forces in Laos. We do have perhaps some other activities. I won't discuss those other activities at this time.
So you don't think they're lying to us about Ukraine? You don't think the U.S. State Department's lying to us, or that they would lie? You don't think they make stuff up to help further their interventions? They're dropping hundreds of millions of bombs on these people and straight up saying to the American public, no, we're not. No, we're not. We're only covertly involved. Shut up. Quit criticizing us. Quit protesting against the war. We're not doing anything. Meanwhile, dropping bombs on the heads of women, on the heads of children, on the heads of civilians, cluster bombs that are still all over the country to this day, and just blatantly lying about it. Disgustingly lying about it. But you think they're still telling the truth today? You think the presidents who are in Richard Nixon's position today are now telling the truth and are being honest about Ukraine and the cluster bombs we're sending to Ukraine? No, the American imperialist ruling class has always been a band of heinous liars. And this is just one of the most blatant examples in American history where they were carpet bombing this country with cluster bombs paid for by our tax dollars and then lying to us about it.
Laos was first occupied by an overseas power in 1893. The capital at that time was ransacked by the Chinese Black Flag Army. The French came to the rescue of the king and started acknowledging Laos as their protectorate. The French were interested in gaining control over the Mekong River, which forms a large part of its western border with Thailand. The river is a crucial trade route from Western China to Southeast Asia. During World War II, the French managed to keep control over some of their protectorates. Only in the closing days of the war, the Japanese occupied Laos for a short period of time. This lasted until they surrendered in 1945.
Woo! Anti-colonial struggles. Get the hell out of here, France and Japan.
Laos regained its independence after a bloody war against the French. Around this time, Vietnam was split into the communist north and the western-backed south. Cambodia and Laos saw the start of a civil war between similar political ideologies. The Cold War had started. Laos feared a similar conflict as in Vietnam, but in 1962,
it's not really fair. I mean, I guess you said it was Vietnam was split into the western-backed South versus the communist North, but I mean, it was really just a Western occupation of the South. Like when the West left, they tried to set up a puppet government in the South, and The government was chased away by the Vietnamese people as the U.S. helicopters were still leaving, right? So literally as the U.S. is leaving and dipping out, this government's already being overthrown by the Vietnamese people. So similar to South Korea, there weren't that many people in the country who actually wanted this pro-capitalist U.S.-backed government. It was the U.S. Meddling in the country and funneling arms and weapons into their preferred groups, and then occupying part of the country and bombing the other half of the country to try and set up their own puppet government.
They reached a landmark agreement. The leaders from Laos, the United States, Soviet Union, and 12 other countries signed an agreement that recognized the neutrality of Laos. Any of these countries were forbidden to invade Laos or to conduct military operations.
When he met Khrushchev in 1961, the one thing they agreed on was not to let Laos become an active theater of war. These agreements provided for a neutral Laos governed by a coalition of 3 princes.
Ben, is this a serious comment or are you joking? A cluster bomb isn't an American combat force, so he's technically correct. But the Air Force troops who dropped the cluster bombs definitely are a combat force. Someone's got to drop the cluster bombs. I assume this is a joke. Oh, thank you so much, the Davey. $5 super chat. Thank you so much for supporting our project. Appreciate it more than I can put into words. Off topic, but I'm currently reading No Great Wall by Carlos Martinez. Love me some Midwestern Marx Publishing Press. Keep up the great work. Thank you. I will relay that message to Carlos Garrido, who really handles the Midwestern Marx Publishing Press. I mean, we all help, but that's really been him leading that up. And if I see Carlos Martinez soon, I'll relay the message to him as well. I'm glad you're reading that book. It's really, really fantastic book about the continuities of the Chinese Revolution. Really helps explain how the era of Deng Xiaoping and the reform and opening up period in China was not a betrayal of the revolution, but rather a deepening of it. So thank you so much for the big $5 super chat. Really, really appreciate you, Davey.
As part of the Neutrality Agreement, a government was formed with pro-American, pro-communist, and neutral parties. This didn't end the war. Instead, it was the beginning of a secret war in Laos.
The security of all Southeast Asia will be endangered if Laos loses its neutral independence. Its own safety runs with the safety of us all, in real neutrality, observed by all.
But almost immediately,
Laos. Talk about the Laos. You kidding me? Laos? Sorry, that's a play on an old football press conference where the guy was like, playoffs? Talking about the playoffs?
Immediately, all parties broke the agreement in one way or another. The Communist Party had control over significant parts of the country. They were secretly supported by the Soviet Union, North Vietnam, and other communist allies. Many of the military supplies of North Vietnam entered through these territories of Laos. The military operations of Vietnam continued in Laos, but now secretly. The Soviet Union, China, and other communist allies continued providing financial and military support, and the US
Based.
started a secret bombing campaign.
The official estimate is
So the Soviets and Chinese gave resources and support to the people's movements, the anti-colonial movements. But the U.S. started a secret bombing campaign and tried to occupy South Vietnam. These things are clearly the same. Just kidding. The U.S. were the bad guys in the Cold War. This is just one of many examples.
that about 1 out of every 4 Laos has been a refugee.
They say that the planes came over all the time, shot at everything.
1 out of every 4 people is made a refugee. So 1 out of every 4 people is being made a refugee in this country with American tax dollars, as the American leaders are saying, nope, we're not doing anything there. We're maybe doing some covert activities, but no direct military operations, just dropping millions of bombs on them and making 1 person in every family of 4 into a refugee. but you know, who even considers that a military operation?
People, cows, buffaloes, houses, rice fields, schools.
The main priorities of the US Air Force were to take out the supply chains from the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They carried out these operations from Thailand, and they dropped enormous numbers of cluster bombs over these regions. Over a period of 9 years, more bombs were dropped in Laos than during the entirety of World War II. Most of which were cluster bombs, which are infamously imprecise. They result in widespread destruction, often with many civilian casualties as a result.
I mean, this is common knowledge about the cluster bombs. Yet we're sending them to Ukraine. We're blocking any attempt to have peace in Ukraine. And we're sending them cluster bombs, these bombs that infamously destroy civilians and that the U.S. has used to destroy so many other countries. You know, but they're telling us the truth about cluster bombs now. You know, they're a good thing now. Trust us. The president is telling us the truth nowadays. Yeah, they were lying about Laos and Vietnam and Nicaragua and El Salvador and Indonesia and Iran and every single country that they've ever done regime change or interventionism in. Yeah, they were lying about all those, but they're telling the truth about Ukraine for sure. You know, the cluster bombs are for freedom, peace, and democracy nowadays. Definitely, you can trust the U.S. presidents in 2023. They just used to lie back in the day. This is sarcasm, by the way. They're lying about Ukraine, too.
But perhaps worst of all is that about a third of these bombs didn't explode. The US dropped an equivalent of a plane load of bombs every 8 minutes, 24 hours per day, 9 years long. About 80 million bombs didn't detonate. These bombs are now scattered across the country and cause casualties.
This is some unbelievable footage here of the bombs just destroying the freaking jungle. Holy crap.
About 80 million bombs didn't detonate. These bombs are now scattered across the country and cause casualties to this day.
I mean, think about the ecological devastation here, too. Like, that was one of the problems with Vietnam. Vietnam would have had a very easy transition to socialism, but their infrastructure was destroyed, and tons of their agricultural land and their forests were poisoned by Agent Orange and napalm that sunk into the soil. Like, look at all the trees that are being destroyed and burned, all the toxicity that's seeping into the soil. And you have China's PLA, the People's Liberation Army in China, has planted a forest the size of Ireland to combat deforestation. And that's what the Chinese military is up to. While the U.S. military is wiping out entire forests, trying to wipe out entire countries with bombs, destroying the soil, destroying the ecology in these countries, making it much harder for these people to grow food. And in Laos, the vast of socialism or communism is very rural, sort of agricultural socialism, where land is redistributed based on need. And you have, you know, a lot of what they've tried to do in Laos is bring healthcare and bring social services to the rural areas, to the rice farmers, and they're having their land, their fields carpet bombed by a much, 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 much larger and wealthier country, right? And what was their crime? What was the crime of the people of Laos? They tried to become socialist. They tried to go ahead with their own form of government where they take care of their people rather than protecting capital, specifically Western capital and Western multinationals. So they just wanted independence. They wanted to democratically choose their own government. And because of that, we carpet bombed their country with cluster bombs.
These areas, most notably Saipan, were very difficult to target from the sky. The village was on a crossroads of 3 major highways leading into Vietnam. It was controlled by the communists, and the region was defended with all sorts of anti-aircraft guns. Meanwhile, the Communist Party was growing in popularity, and they controlled much of these lands. They received support from North Vietnam, the Soviets, and their allies. The US also needed an ally on the ground. They found them in the Hmong communities. The Hmong originated in China and lived in the remote mountains of Laos. They had been at odds with the rest of the country for centuries, and they welcomed ties with the West. The CIA started training a secret Hmong army and provided them with the right weapons to combat the communist government. The war and the bombing continued for 19 years. A tenth of the population died in the war, and twice as many were wounded.
A tenth of the population. That's insane. That is insane. A tenth of the population. Imagine that in the U.S., right? And in the DPRK, we killed an estimated 20% of their population. Imagine in the 70s, another country invaded us and killed 10% of our population, or 20% of our population, one person every family of 5. Do you know the kind of hatred that we would hold towards that country, or the kind of generational trauma that that would instill if almost everybody in the country had a relative who was killed in this offensive war of aggression by another country? And then we act like the people in the DPRK are crazy for hating the U.S., or the communists are crazy in other countries for not liking the U.S. Like, if any country did to the U.S. what we've done to Laos, Vietnam, or the DPRK, bombing them to oblivion and then keeping them under economic sanctions to try and starve their people and turn them against the government, every American in existence would hate these countries, and rightfully so. But then the U.S. is so arrogant, right? Those North Koreans, they sure are crazy. They don't even like us. They don't know we stand for freedom and democracy. Well, we killed 20% of their population. Kind of feel like Americans would hate Iran if Iran killed 20% of our population in a war of aggression after we never attacked them. Especially if Iran justified it by saying Americans have a liberal political system, therefore we need to bomb the crap out of them because they're not allowed to have whatever political system they want. We've decided that our political system is best and everyone else gets bombed. Thank you so much to the Fine Art Revolution. This is huge towards your iPad. Wow, thank you so much. This will really, really, really help. This is a giant super chat. Thank you so much, Fine Art Revolution. I've been recommending your page to some people. We've been talking a lot lately about the need for revolutionary art and the importance of revolutionary art. So thank you so much. I don't even know how to say thank you for a $50 super chat. That's just insane. Crazy to me, but it means a lot that anyone would care enough about what we're doing and the kind of content that we're putting out and the kind of education that we're doing to send $50 of their own money to the project. So I promise I will use it well. Promise I will invest it in, like an iPad for the Institute, which will lead to much more outreach, much more pro-socialist, pro-revolutionary propaganda. So thank you so much. And everyone go follow the Fine Art Revolution. They're pretty awesome. Thanks. You're welcome. Keep up the work. We'll do. With great supporters like you, I feel obligated to keep up the work. There's so many people who have supported us and, materially supported us, or who have just supported us by even, something as small as liking and sharing our content, tweeting out our content. So, we definitely feel an obligation to keep working hard for the people. So thank you so much.
A full quarter of the entire population became refugees. The millions of undetonated bombs are still scattered across Laos. The Communist Party eventually won the power of government and the US retreated. In 2013, the US had spent $118 million in cleanup efforts, which is a little less than they spent every 10 days in the 9 years of bombing Laos.
Wow, this video does not pull any punches, does it? Because the U.S. brags about this cleaning budget. Obama tried to use this as a brag, as a flex. Look at all the money we're giving to Laos. We're such good people, as Obama's destroying Libya and trying to destroy Syria. We're such good people. We gave Laos $18 million to clean up over 24 years. Meanwhile, they were spending $130 million every 10 days to drop bombs on Laos. They can always afford bombs. They can always find more money for weapons of war. They can never seem to find any money for cleanup or for construction. Because imperialism and capitalism are destructive.
I also know that the remnants of war continue to shatter lives here in Laos. Many of the bombs that were dropped were never exploded. Over the years, thousands of Laotians have been killed or injured. Farmers tending their fields, children playing. And that's why, as president, I dramatically increased our funding to help remove these unexploded bombs.
Oh, you're such a good guy. You're such a good guy. Talk about how you brought slavery back to Libya. Talk about how you convinced us that Gaddafi was an evil dictator who needed to be destroyed. So you took him out and transformed Libya from the most prosperous country in all of Africa to an extremely impoverished country in a state of perpetual civil war where slaves are being traded out in the open. Talk about that. Talk about the missiles you launched at Syria and the arms and funding that you funneled into the hands of extremist terrorists in Syria, throwing their country into a civil war. Talk about that. I don't want to hear you pat yourself on the back for giving Laos a tiny little bit of money to clean up the millions of bombs that we dropped on their country. God, liberals will praise themselves for anything. They're so narcissistic. They'll take any opportunity to pat themselves on the back. You know, sure, we spent $130 million every 10 days to carpet bomb Laos, but we sent them $100 million over the next 25 years to clean up the carpet bombs. Sorry, we can't bring back the 10% of your population we killed, but here's some money to clean up. Here's some money to buy brooms and hazmat suits for when you go collect the bombs we dropped on your country. That is classic liberalism right there. Patting yourself on the back. We did it. My administration did it. We gave them $1 million to clean up the bombs that we dropped on them. We are good people.
So today I'm proud to announce a historic increase in these efforts. The United States will double our...
Most of that funding just goes to pay the salaries of overpaid U.S. employees and NGOs anyway. Yes, right. It's like USAID money, right, that they say is going to clean up in Laos that actually goes towards regime change efforts in Laos that gets funneled into opposition groups in Laos or U.S. NGOs pushing anti-communist propaganda in Laos. Because like I said, they're still, despite being the most bombed country on earth, the communists still took power. They're still a Marxist-Leninist government. I mean, what a fat L for the Western imperialists that is. That Vietnam and Laos are still Marxist-Leninist governments to this day, despite the millions of dollars that the U.S. invested in trying to destroy these socialist experiments. Solidarity with our comrades in South Asia.
Annual funding to $90 million over the next 3 years.
We did it, Joe.
Help Laos expand its work.
This kind of spending is painful.
It's like going to a friend's house, making a mess, and saying bye. It is. It's like going to a friend's house, trashing their house, kicking out their windows, like taking a dump on their kitchen table, and then giving them $2 and being like, here you go, you can buy a vacuum, and then leaving. And then being like, I'm a pretty good guy, aren't I? I gave that dude a vacuum, or I gave him $2 to buy a vacuum to clean his house. Yeah, I also kicked out all his windows and took a dump on his carpet, but I gave him $2 for the vacuum as well. Gosh, I'm such a good guy. My arm is getting sore from patting myself on the back so much.
Fully insulting. Less than 1% of undetonated bombs have been cleared, and we need a whole lot more to make up for history.
So there you go. And like I said, to this day, Laos has this form of agricultural socialism, and they only opened up to tourism in the 2000s, as early as 2000, because it's obviously a big source of revenue for the country, and a lot of socialist communist countries have done this, like Cuba. But there was a lot of rebuilding that needed to be done. There was a lot of construction that needed to happen after the secret war in Laos, and what they've done is brought healthcare, brought education, brought a lot of development to the rice farmers and the agricultural areas of Laos. So now they're still largely an agricultural country, right? They're largely rice farmers. That's their main profession there. But they are socialist. They are governed by a Marxist-Leninist government. There are systems of healthcare in all the rural areas that have been set up by the communists. They do land redistribution. If one person starts to get too big, they start to own too much land, the land is given to somebody who doesn't have as much land, who could use that. So they still have a socialist government in Laos that's continuing to develop and continuing to pursue more construction projects. They have a very, very deep brotherly relationship with Vietnam, who, they work together on pretty much everything. And then obviously a very close relationship with China. And it's unlikely that Laos and Vietnam would still be socialist Marxist-Leninist countries to this day if it wasn't for China. And China's ability to trade with them. Although there's been lots of beef between Vietnam and China forever, including since both countries have had their revolutions and become communist. But regardless, solidarity with our Lao comrades and our Vietnamese comrades. More bombs dropped on them than any other country. And they're still socialist. I haven't heard any Western communists condemn Laos for being an evil authoritarian dictatorship, which is good. But still very important to learn about Laos and show solidarity with them in their struggle for socialism. So I'm going to run to the bathroom quick. Let me pull up something for y'all to watch in between. Before I go to the bathroom, I want to say again, we are right now doing a fundraiser to buy Eddie an iPad so I can continue to make TikToks and short form content and stream on TikTok and do all sorts of good stuff like that. TikTok is the place where we're most popular. It's the app that most allows the Institute to grow. But my phone is breaking down. My phone is dying. It's not long for this world. It keeps restarting on me. TikTok keeps getting deleted from my phone, like deleting itself from my phone. Maybe I'm being hacked by the NSA. Maybe I'm not. Who knows? But either way, I'm going to get an iPad exclusively for creating TikToks and editing and short form content. So to donate to the I Buy Eddie an iPad fund, go to buymeacoffee.com/Eddie Liger. And yeah, every donation that goes here will go straight to the iPad. We just had the Fine Art Revolution give us a $50 super chat in addition to a bunch of other super chats that we got today. So thank you to them. And thank you to everyone who's given a super chat. You're helping to grow the Buy Eddie an iPad fund. But the best way to help me get an iPad and continue my TikTok content is to donate at buymeacoffee.com/Eddie Liger. So yeah, I encourage people to do that, or maybe share that page on Twitter. If you want to help out, but you don't have money right now, obviously we totally understand that. Let's see here. Actually, let's go to my junior year. Smith, Eddie. I'm going to pull up a wrestling match while I run to the bathroom. All right, enjoy, folks. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Be right back. How am I doing? Am I winning? Eddie's purple, I think. I am purple. No, I'm back. I don't even remember this match or this tournament. This doesn't look like it was a very exciting match, actually. Oh, that was nice. That was really nice. That's what you call a re-attack. See, I'm in purple. He shoots. I don't let him get away. I don't just push him away. I make him pay for the bad shot. Get him in the head in the hole. Show him who daddy is. I like to whisper sweet nothings in the other guy's ears when I wrestle. You're the best I ever had. Just kidding. But I know a guy who used to do that. He was actually pretty good. Weird guy, though. Weird guy. This is a short story. I want to cover this, though, because Lindsey Graham, Republican senator, has floated the idea of invading Mexico to stop the trafficking of fentanyl, when we know that Western pharmaceutical companies are the reason that there's an opioid crisis and a fentanyl overdose crisis. And these companies have never been held accountable. And in fact, the Sackler family has been given basically diplomatic immunity or legal immunity. And people have said that they've ruled that the Sackler family can't be charged for their role in lying to Americans about the dangerous addictive effects and properties of opioids and the potential for causing overdose. So while the Sackler family and the pharmaceutical industry has gotten off scot-free, Lindsey Graham wants to invade Mexico because that's where some of the fentanyl is coming from. Because that makes a lot of sense. Why would we punish our own pharmaceutical companies that lied to the American masses and dosed them with opioids so that they could make a lot of profit when we could invade Mexico, when we could start another senseless war and make a bunch of money for the military-industrial complex that Lindsey Graham is a puppet of? But either way, another story that shows how ridiculous that is just came out. A San Jose police union executive is facing fentanyl smuggling charges. So they were basically running a giant fentanyl smuggling ring. So the U.S. has this going on where executives within our own police force are trying to smuggle are actively smuggling fentanyl into this country. Right? The police, who are supposed to be the ones cracking down or preventing the trade of fentanyl, they're helping to run a fentanyl drug ring, but Lindsey Graham wants to invade Mexico. Why would we crack down on our own police force? Why would we restructure the way that we do the war on drugs? Why would we crack down on our own pharmaceutical companies that have been dosing people with opioids when we can invade our neighbors, a country who's never attacked us and has no ill will towards us, really? Why not just start a war with them to fight fentanyl rather than do a million different things that we could do to help or in our own country to help prevent fentanyl overdose and addiction? Why don't we invest in rehabilitation? Why don't we take all the Sackler family's profits that they made off opioids and say they have to invest in rehab? Well, actually, it's because the rehabilitation for opioids and fentanyl has actually become a for-profit industry by itself, which I wrote about in the Journal of American Socialist Studies 2 that you can read, giving a historical analysis of the American pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare industry in general. There are, it's very expensive to go into rehab, and a lot of these rehab facilities are just like luxury vacation places for rich people. So that's the Sackler family did have to donate some money to rehabilitation, but it just got sucked up into the for-profit rehabilitation industry, which they also make money off of course. So they're making money by getting you addicted to opioids and then making money on the back end on the rehab. But regardless, here's the story.
Operating an international drug operation while working for the San Jose Police Union, and now she is officially out of a job. Today, the union formally announced it has fired its former civilian chief executive director, Joanne Segovia. She's facing a drug trafficking charge in federal court. The police union also announced plans for an independent investigation. Here's NBC Bay Area's Robert Hondo with the latest moves as calls for transparency continue to get louder.
The frantic-looking woman now facing at least one federal drug trafficking charge is a far cry from the poised civilian executive director who was part of the San Jose POA for 20 years. 64-year-old Joanne Segovia was formally fired from her job with the POA this morning, just days after being charged in federal court with importing fentanyl and other drugs from overseas and sending it out to dealers in other states for years.
My disbelief and shock has turned to anger. And while there's still some disbelief, I'm just angry right now.
A Department of Homeland Security investigation.
So angry that I think we should invade Mexico to stop this.
Showed she allegedly accepted more than 60 international drug shipments at her home, an operation she often ran using her POA office computer. The POA says it will now bring in an independent investigator with knowledge of federal law to see if the POA could have done more to uncover her crime.
Could there have been something that we had in place that would have identified this type of deception and behavior?
Mayor Matt Mahan says these steps need to be taken.
I'm incredibly disappointed and disturbed by the allegations. I think it's a slap in the face to our police officers and other city employees who are working very hard to get fentanyl off our streets.
Oh, sure they are. Who are working very hard to keep the prisons filled with bodies at the behest of the prison industrial complex. Or working very hard to lock these people up who were dosed with opioids, who were told by a doctor to take opioids because they had pain. And then they got addicted, eventually ran out of money and started doing heroin. And the state comes, the cops come and throw you in jail for it. They're working very, very hard to protect our streets, though. This is just a betrayal. No, the whole institution's corrupt. The cops are nothing but an armed body of the state that help make money for the prison industrial complex. This whole thing is a mess. The prison industrial complex is profiting off of the opioid crisis because the more people who are drug-addled and get thrown in jail by the cops, the more money the prison industrial complex can make off of them. And the only solution our politicians can come up with for this is let's invade Mexico. Let's start another war. Right? The last war on drugs failed. We just need to ramp it up or start another one or start one where we're literally invading other countries to fight drugs, apparently. So it's just insanity. It's crazy how bad the opioid crisis has gotten, how bad the fentanyl crisis has gotten, and how nobody who was responsible for creating the crisis has been held accountable because capital never gets held accountable under capitalism. Nobody's been held accountable, and the situation has continued to get worse. The only solution they can come up with is let's start another war. Absolutely nuts. Who needs dystopian fiction when you've got reality? No kidding. No kidding. My police force protects me. First they put me in a cage, then they guard me. True. They blame China for U.S. fentanyl addiction. Crazy. Yeah, that too. That too. Give the Sackler family diplomatic immunity and then blame everything on China and Mexico. Like, who's stupid enough to believe that? A lot of people, apparently. The statistic is something crazy, like there were more bombs dropped on Vietnam, Laos, and Korea by the U.S. alone than by all nations combined during the entirety of World War II. Literally insane. Yes. And this is why I say that the Cold War wasn't cold. The Cold War is called the Cold War because there was never any direct military action between the USSR and the U.S. There was never any direct military conflict. But That doesn't mean there wasn't any direct military action by the U.S. And in fact, there was all across the world, all across Latin America, Africa, Southern Asia. The U.S. was bombing countries, overthrowing leaders, funneling arms and weapons into fascistic far-right extremist groups. And millions and millions and millions of people were killed during this time. So the idea that this was a Cold War, that this was a war against communism waged by the U.S. without killing anyone is hilariously dumb. Millions and millions and millions and millions of people have been killed by the imperialist West's crusade against communism. In fact, someone should make a book called The Black Book of Capitalism, where they detail exactly how many people have been killed. I think that'd be a real good idea. Whoa, $5 super sticker from Stephanie. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Appreciate you for helping to support our project, helping to fund what we do here. That'll go right to the Buying Eddie an iPad fund. Yeah. Also, for the 18th time today, encourage people to donate on buymeacoffee.com/Eddie Liger. That's where, that's how you can donate to the Buy Eddie an iPad fund. Yeah, appreciate the super stickers as well. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Much love. Any deaths blamed on communism should rightfully be blamed on capitalism. Yup. For the most part. But my uncle actually tripped and fell down the stairs in the Soviet Union, so that's, just another death of communism. Of which 3 or 2 goes to YouTube. Yeah, Buy Me a Coffee is nice because they don't take your money the way that YouTube and them do. But let's see here. Okay, so last thing I want to do today is I just want to detail some of the things that Biden said in his sit down with Fareed Zakaria. Now, I would hate for anyone to have to sit and listen to both Biden and Fareed Zakaria talk for 20 minutes straight. Both of them are neoliberals through and through, establishment libs, who's have an emotional attachment to furthering the proxy war effort in Ukraine. So I would hate for anyone to have to listen to them for 20 minutes. So I listened to them so you don't have to. And I broke down everything basically that Biden says in this interview, at least everything he says that's important. Thank you, Namtrin, for becoming a YouTube member. Appreciate that. Shout out to all the YouTube members. I'm pretty sure if you're a $10 YouTube member, you get access to Carlos's book in PDF form, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. So, yeah, shout out to all the YouTube members. You also get some emotes and some other privileges. So there you go. Thank you, Namtrim. But anyways, another NATO summit is coming up, and these NATO summits are very important. The last summit was actually where NATO declared that Russia and China are their #1 enemies going forward, and that the main goal of NATO going forward is to contain Russia and China. So really laid out their strategy of their new Cold War strategy going forward. So Zakaria asks Biden a lot about that. He asks him first, are you going to add Ukraine to NATO? Biden says there's no plans to add Ukraine to NATO because he knows what that would imply. He knows that that would mean Russia and NATO are in a direct conflict, which would draw all the other NATO countries into a war with Russia, which could mean nuclear warfare and the end of Western civilization as we know it. But he just explained that away by saying Ukraine needs to democratize before we add them to NATO. He doesn't really say that we can't add them to NATO because it's going to mean nuclear devastation. So, still lying to the people, of course. But Ukraine isn't a democracy. So he's not lying about that part, I guess. But thankfully, thank God, no plans to add Ukraine to NATO yet. Apparently, this administration isn't that psychotic and hell-bent on nuclear war yet. So Zakaria also asked him about adding Sweden to NATO, and Biden gave a different answer there. He said, yes, absolutely, we want to add Sweden, but Turkey doesn't want it. He said that Turkey's concerned about Swedish immigrants burning the Quran in Sweden. He said it's not the Swedes who are burning the Quran, but immigrants in Sweden who are doing it, and it's legal to do so in Sweden, which angers Turkey. So they're trying to stop that now. They're trying to get some kind of law in Sweden to make Quran burning illegal so that they can join NATO and the U.S. can give Turkey F-16s. And the U.S. can continue to militarize Turkey while continuing to expand NATO, which, by the way, you know, Biden says he's open to Ukraine eventually joining NATO, and he wants Sweden to join NATO. And he says in this interview, there's an open door policy to NATO. Anyone can join, even though they promised Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union that they wouldn't expand NATO anymore. So every time that NATO expands or Biden suggests that they want to expand NATO, it's the U.S. breaking their promise. It's the U.S. going back on their word and threatening Russia in a way that they promised never to do. So this is why nobody trusts the U.S. anymore, and this is why more countries are doing business with Russia and China and are jumping away from the U.S. and the U.S. dollar. So recently there was an Iraqi Christian immigrant in Sweden who burned the Quran outside of a mosque. So that's why they're saying Turkey doesn't want Sweden to join NATO, but the U.S. is trying to make that happen. So very interesting. Then Zakaria asked him about sending Ukraine cluster bombs, even though Jen Psaki, Biden's former press secretary, said if Russia were to use cluster bombs, that would be a war crime and we would have to get more involved. But of course, when the U.S. does anything, it's for freedom, democracy, and peace. When Russia does something, it's a war crime. They're killing civilians. Putin's eating puppies. But when the U.S. uses cluster bombs, it's for peace and freedom. And Biden straight up says that we're sending them cluster bombs because, well, Russia bad, of course, but also because Ukraine and NATO countries are running out of arms. They're running out of ammunition to send to Ukraine. So they have to fall back on cluster bombs, which hilariously Cobra Commander, someone said earlier, like, so when we run out of cluster bombs, are we going to give Ukraine nukes? You know, oh, we don't have any more cluster bombs to send them. Better give them nuclear weapons. That's the same logic they're using here. We don't have any ammunition to send Ukraine. Better send them these bombs that are notorious for killing civilians and being imprecise and flattening infrastructure. So just disgusting the way that Biden and these neocon war hawks are justifying these bombs that are notorious for the way that they kill civilians and destroy infrastructure, while saying we need to do it because Russia bad. And this also, I keep pointing this out, but in the debate with Vaush, I said that one of Russia's goals is demilitarization, not only of Ukraine, but of the NATO countries of the West. The longer this protracted conflict goes on, the more Ukraine runs out of ammunition, the more NATO runs out of ammunition. And one of the Russia's stated goals is demilitarization. And when I said this, or you could call it de-weaponization, I guess. And when I said this, Vaush was like, oh, you really think Russia's trying to demilitarize Ukraine? He acted like it was the stupidest thing I ever said. Well, what's happening now, dipshit? What's happening now, Vaush? Biden is admitting that the U.S. is sending Ukraine cluster bombs because they're out of ammunition. Kind of sounds like demilitarization to me. Kind of sounds like exactly what I said was going to happen, and exactly like Brian Berletic said was going to happen on his show, The New Atlas. But Vaush has his brain clogged with peanut M&Ms, so the truth can't penetrate his thick fucking skull. But either way, that's what they say about NATO and the current state of NATO. And then at 6:28 here, Biden starts talking about China, and it is the most incoherent rambling I've ever heard, honestly. That's actually not true. For Biden, it's not that incoherent, but it's still pretty freaking incoherent.
They don't, and I think they needed them.
Let me ask you about China policy. Recently, there have been announcements of new restrictions on Chinese companies relating to cloud computing. The Chinese are now beginning to put restrictions in place on critical materials relating to semiconductors. When I travel around the world, the sense I get is people are wondering, where is this going? Is this a ratchet where the United States will keep doing things like this, the Chinese will start responding, and this goes on? Or do you think there's a kind of stable point here where U.S.-China relations can be, as you have often said, competitive, but also, when necessary, cooperative?
The answer is I think there's a stable point. But look, if you don't mind my saying, just before we went on air, we talked about things are changing in the world. China is in flux right now as well. China has enormous potential capacity, but enormous problems as well. And so there's two things that I have tried to do in terms of our China policy. And by the way, I have met person to person with Xi Jinping more than any other world leader. 68 hours alone, he and I with an interpreter, back when I was vice president all the way through, because as you remember, it was clear he was going to be president, and it wasn't appropriate for the president of the United States, Barack Obama, to be traveling the world with him, but I traveled 17,000 miles with him when he was vice president in China. And so we understand each other, I think, fairly well, number one. Number two, everything's changing. You know, you've heard me say it before, the world's at an inflection point. No matter what was happening, China is in a different place right now. Internally. I'll give you an example. He often says to me, not often, he has on two occasions called me and said, why am I criticizing what's going on in Western China and slave labor, et cetera? And I said, remember you told me that for China to be able to be secure, it needs to have one leader, a united China from Taiwan to the Tibetan Plateau, and that's when China has always done well, going all the way.
What the hell is he talking about, dude? What? This is the leader of our country. Like, what is he saying here? He says, Xi Jinping called me about Xinjiang and said, why are you making these baseless accusations about Xinjiang that come from Adrian Zenz, this whack job who said he's on a mission from God to destroy China, which is the main source of information about the so-called Uyghur genocide. There's a coalition of Islamic countries, of Muslim majority countries, who have all come together and said China is not doing a genocide. The United Nations has been invited by China to investigate Xinjiang and investigate to see if there's a genocide going on, and they've refused. And the U.S. has pressured them to refuse because they know there's not anything actually going on. So they don't actually want an investigation carried out. They just want to use this as a propaganda talking point to accuse China of doing genocide so they can continue to sanction them and encircle them with our military, which is what Biden's been doing. In Biden's response to being asked by Xi Jinping, why are you continually pushing this propaganda narrative, this propaganda talking point, is you told me that, you know, we need one China and one united China and Taiwan. And it's like, what? He asked you about Xinjiang, not Taiwan. And the one China policy is a policy that the U.S. has agreed to respect, right? The one China policy means that Taiwan is a part of China, that there's one China, and you can have two separate systems between Taiwan and China, but ultimately it's one China. It's one country. Taiwan has been part of China for thousands and thousands of years, and they are today. And the U.S. agrees to this policy. This is, you know, even the stated U.S. policy is that there's one China. But what does that have to do with Xinjiang? What does that have to do with the Uyghur genocide narrative that stems from Adrian Zenz and groups like the ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, this U.S.-backed separatist group? They're completely unrelated. He's just in the middle of this Biden-style ramble where he brings up like a million things at once, and by the end of his sentence, you have no idea where he was even going with that.
Back to the time when we had in-person. And I said, and so for me not to talk about, and you told me for you not to talk about unity of China, it would be, you wouldn't be able to lead. I said, well, the United States is the most unique nation in the world. We are organized based on an idea, for real, an only idea. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women are created equal, et cetera. We've never lived up to it. We've never walked away from it. And for me, for American presidents to remain silent on slave labor would be totally inconsistent. And so I think what I'm trying to say is, I'm sorry to go on so.
What are you trying to say, Joe? What the hell are you trying to say? And what does slave labor have to do with the one China policy? You're mixing up your regime change efforts, buddy. Taiwan is the eastern part of China. Xinjiang is in the western part of China. Right? You're mixing up the efforts of the U.S. to back and arm separatist groups and destabilize the Chinese state. It's almost like it was a Freudian slip there, where he said that you need one China, a united China, for China to be strong and independent and stable. But then and that's his response to being asked about Xinjiang, right? Because what the U.S. is trying to do is obviously destabilize China, turn people against their government, and back separatist groups in Xinjiang like the ETIM, so that they can destabilize China and make it so China's not unified. Same thing they're trying to do by backing separatist movements in Taiwan and Hong Kong. Grandpa Joe.
Long is that I think there is a way to establish a working relationship with China that
Bro is confusing himself while trying to avoid giving a straight answer. That's exactly what it is. He's trying to dance around the truth while still accusing China of doing slave labor or genocide or whatever, even though there's no evidence for it. Yeah, while dancing around the truth and not angering Xi Jinping too much so that American corporations can keep making money in China.
benefits them and us. And the last thing I'll tell you on this is I also called him after he had that meeting with the Russians about this new relationship, et cetera. And I said, this is not a threat, this is an observation. I said, since Russia went into Ukraine, 600 American corporations have pulled out of Russia. And you've told me that your economy depends on investment from Europe and the United States. And be careful, be careful.
So now he's threatening China, threatening them with economic sanctions.
And so what did he say? He listened, and he didn't argue. And if you notice, he has not gone full bore on Russia. He talks about nuclear war would be a disaster. There is
because he's not an idiot like you who gets involved in issues around the world and gets sends military and just gets heavily involved in issues around the world to try and push us towards nuclear war.
Such a thing as security that's needed anyway. So I think
and China does make a lot of money from Western corporations. So they don't want the U.S. to impose a whole bunch of sanctions on them. But if they did, they'd be fine. They'd survive the same way Russia has. The same way Russia has been hurt by the sanctions, but prices have continued to fall in Russia and their energy sector has continued to grow, which has angered the U.S. to no end and has actually seen the sanctions backfire and hurt European countries more than it's hurt Russia. Similar things would happen with China. If we placed them under sanctions and pulled out all Western corporations from China, that would be devastating for the U.S. We're entirely dependent on China for their labor market and for their consumer markets. So those sanctions would heavily backfire, but that's not going to stop Joe from threatening them.
I think there's a way we can work through this. And that's why I spent so much time beefing up. I think if I told you 3 years ago, which I had written about in my notes, that I was going to get Japan deeply involved, have them change their defense budget, have them work with not that I've done it, but them work with South Korea, work something out. We're going to put together the Quad, which is India, Australia, the United States, and Japan. I got a call from on that. He said, why are you doing that? I said, we're not doing that to surround you. We're doing that to maintain stability in the Indian Ocean and in the South China Sea.
Right. We're not militarizing Japan and Australia so that we can surround you. We just want stability in the South China Sea. We just want a whole bunch of pro-US military and pro-NATO military surrounding your country. Like, dude, how stupid do you think we are, Biden? In the last sentence, you threatened to sanction China. You threatened to surround their country with our military and prevent any trade from getting in or out. And then in the next sentence, you say, yeah, and we're also moving to encircle them with our military, but it's not a threat. How dumb do you think we are? You just threatened them with sanctions. And then in the next sentence, you say we're encircling them with our military, but this isn't threatening at all. Like the stupidity. How stupid do you think China is? You think Xi Jinping is listening to that? And he's like, oh, yeah, they're surrounding us with our military, but they're just trying to look out for stability. They just want stability by encircling our entire country with the Navy. They think we're idiots. They take us for fools. Stability from who, Joe? Exactly. So more threats towards China. more escalations with Russia. But as of now, Ukraine is not being added to NATO. So things are better than what they could be. We're avoiding nuclear war and the complete collapse of Western society as we know it for the time being. There already exists a black book of capitalism, but only in French and German. Oh, that's interesting. Well, all right, y'all. I'm heading out now. I'm very tired. This was a great stream. Thank you for hanging out with me. I got to go to wrestling practice now, though. Buymeacoffee.com/Eddie Liger for the iPad fund. Follow us on all platforms. Thank you so much to our moderators, Jacob Ware Pilgrim, Cobra Commander. Who else? I don't know. That might be all that we had as far as moderators today. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Eddie. Love your content. Thank you all so much. It'd be impossible without all of you. Special shout out to the Fine Art Revolution today who sent us a $50 super chat. That's huge. Can't put into words how much that does for the project and how much that allows us to put out more content. Also, thank you to all the new YouTube members, the Davey and Stephanie, Battle Kosak, Christopher Romero, and Ross, who all sent super chats today. Appreciate you all so much. Thanks for everything. Solidarity. We'll see you next time.